What's hot at CES 2021?
Is the Galaxy S21 Ultra worth buying?
And what's the fallout from Trump v Twitter? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman and I'm just relaxing here poolside in Las Vegas after a heavy day on the CES show floor. Hey Adam, did you win back that fat stack of cash you lost on the blackjack tables last night?
Oh man, it's all a bit fuzzy. Really, the last thing I remember is cramming Mike Tyson's Tiger into the back of an Uber and tipping the driver with a $100 chip. After that, I don't know.
Of course, sadly, none of that is actually true in the technical, truth-telling sense. Thanks to the pandemic, CES has had to go all virtual this year with a totally online presence, and as such, we've had to append a virtual Vegas to the virtual Vertical Hold studios, which at least means that neither of us is going to go broke betting on red again this year. And siding up to the poker table, and upping the ante, of course, is Jennifer Dudley Nicholson from News Corp. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Jen, I know you're a CES veteran of many, many shows, and bearing in mind that axiom about what happens in Vegas staying there and all that, what's the weirdest thing you reckon you've seen on the CES show floor in years gone by?
Gosh, years gone by. I think my favourite was probably a guy who asked me if we had the internet in Australia yet. That was pretty special. Although, every now and again you see, a woman wearing nothing but paint, or there was Baz Luhrmann who just popped up beside me one day. There's always something weird, and so it's been weird in its lack of weirdness this year. In that the only weird thing is a cat popping in occasionally to see what I'm doing.
Wait a minute. Baz Luhrmann was covered in paint? I'm confused here.
So was I.
That must have been in the outtakes. I missed that bit of Moulin Rouge.
We'll be talking everything new at the digital-only CES 2021 later. And I also chatted to Pickers Lee Stark about the absolute worst-kept secret in smartphones, with Samsung announcing a slew of new Galaxy S21 handsets. And that's coming up a little later too. But first, Jen, we sort of can't ignore the orange, possibly bald elephant in the room. I've not heard much out of Donald Trump's Twitter recently, Jen. Is he just on holidays or something?
Oh, look, let's assume so. Look, everyone, when they get to the start of the holidays are in view, or they're about to swap jobs. I think they get a little bored. Nothing really happens, and they just cruise on through. That could be happening, right?
It sounds believable to me. Adam, are you
I
on
love
train
that
with this line of
alternative
thinking?
universe. Can we move to that alternative universe? If
Adam,
there's a
what's the actual
multiverse
story
theory. Well, the story here is that Twitter banned Trump temporarily after the things that he said that they believe inspired what happened at the Capitol, and then turned around later and said, no, he's actually out permanently. Now, Jen, the other social media platforms have kind of fallen in behind Twitter, but it's kind of led the way here. Why has Twitter done this now? Is what Trump's done now to deserve this worse than what he's done in the past? How does it all line up?
Look, it's really hard to judge when Trump is being at his worst. It's all just shades of poo, really.
Yes.
Was it 50 Shades of Brown?
Yes.
I think that the thing that Twitter was able to do finally, and this comes as a lot of Twitter employees have, petitioned for this to happen as well, because there was a potential threat of inciting violence, fomenting, as they say, violence and violent outbursts that potentially risk democracy in America, which I think is kind of. It's pretty big, but if you saw footage from the riots, it was definitely scary. I think because there's that involved, then Twitter can finally pull the pin and say, okay, this is not just, yelling at a foreign power anymore, which he has absolutely done. This is not just, giving people terrible names. This is something more than that. This is affecting, real life, not just, sort of discourse on Twitter. So we can actually take this step now. We can suspend him. It's weird that they didn't say that they were going to ban him. They said he was permanently suspended. But if you look up the dictionary definition, that is what a ban is, actually. And I thought it was interesting that so many of the different social networks came on board after Twitter initially said, look, we've suspended him for a period of time. Facebook actually took action. And if you've ever reported anything really dodgy to Facebook, you'll know that it's a big deal to get them to do anything. So that's when you know that something's really, really serious has happened. However, I would point out the cynical side of me says there was like 2 weeks to go or less than 2 weeks ago when this actually happened. There was plenty of opportunity for this to happen much earlier than it did.
So
Like,
they've
say, 3 or 4 years ago, for
Yeah.
example.
For example, yes. It looked for a time like there was going to be a nuclear war started over a tweet. And it became, less like, let's go and get a bunker as less, let's, try to get the last joke in before the world ends. And there was a time when it looked legitimate, like that could be a thing.
But Twitter's basically admitted over the last 4 years that Donald Trump has been breaking its rules, and were he anybody else, he would have been out on his ass by now. So there's a bit of a double standard there that now they've finally decided to enforce rules that they admit he was already breaking.
Absolutely. And they actually put in a policy along the way that was specifically, it was really Trumpian. It was basically
The
specifically
no
for Trump.
Trumps rule.
Exactly. They didn't quite call it Trump's rule, but it was something like, a protection for public officials, essentially. And it said that, you can break the rules within limits if you're an elected official or a government official. And you then get, more protection, essentially, than regular Twitter users when you use all caps to go off in the middle of the night. However, yeah, in retrospect, it'll be interesting to see whether they decide that that was fully justified. And hopefully we won't come across a circumstance where they need to have a look at that again, and we'll just have sensible leaders throughout the world from now on. But who knows?
Yeah, I think the inconsistency here is jarring, but I think the intent is pretty clear because it's that direct line of connection between rhetoric and action. He's said appalling things, but they haven't directly been entirely traceable. And so this one, I think, just kind of hit a bit harder right towards the end of the presidency. I guess the kind of broader question here comes about because there's then been this backlash idea of, well, wait, are they just silencing his political voice? And I don't think anyone would be too shocked to say that I wouldn't be too upset by that in terms of Trump particularly, but is there merit in that?
Look, I understand what they're saying in terms of censorship. I think it would have been, if they had have done it, as you say, 3 years ago, then potentially there could have been some justification of this right towards the end of the presidency when there's a new president-elect involved. I think it holds less weight. However, in all of this, the social networks, much as it's hard to feel sympathy for them, they are in a weird position. And they've got to balance out that idea between, you need to have public discourse and you need to be able to hear what your elected officials are saying. At the same time, they shouldn't be encouraging people to go and break democracy and storm the Capitol building and attack politicians, because you would have thought that wasn't in their interest particularly. So they are in a really tricky position. However, I would point out that nobody should be saying these things, not just elected officials. And so certainly maybe this sets a good precedent for the future.
So in Australia, we've had a big ongoing debate about the responsibility that social media has and whether it should be treated like a publisher, whether the government should have more control over it. And there seems to be some politicians who, on one hand, are saying social media needs to be held more responsible, yet some of them at the same time are saying, but this is an impingement on Trump's freedom of speech. How does all this affect the big picture argument in Australia of how social media should or should not be regulated?
I think it shows just how tricky it's going to be. And I think that every country has an interest in making sure that, public discourse actually occurs on social media, but there aren't those real world consequences, and it doesn't affect things like vaccination rates, for example, or, conspiracy theories to spread like wildfire. And I think this goes to show just how difficult that is. There is a lot of hypocrisy out there happening, though, where you've got, potentially elected officials spreading incorrect, absolutely false messages around medicine. I think some of the things that Twitter's put in around labels are really important, and I found that very useful. And but I think they're experimenting to kind of work out how that works best, and just sending people a message to say you can see this, but just so you know, these are the facts as we know them, and directing people in that way. In some cases, that won't be enough, but I think that that's been a really useful addition that we've seen come out of the Trump years.
I think it's important to point out, though, I mean, both the social media companies are private companies, and while Twitter is big right now, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, MySpace was huge. MySpace also coincidentally banned Donald Trump, which I found quite amusing. But
That's
also
got to
in
sting.
Australia, there's this whole discussion of free speech. We don't have a right of free speech. It's actually not something that's enshrined. So I wonder how much of this is actually what Australia does is kind of going to be irrelevant to a Twitter, because actually what they're doing is they're following more US law where free speech is much more constitutionally protected.
Yeah, in Australia, it is the vibe because we don't have a Bill of Rights. And so I like that we get to quote the castle a lot when it comes to these things. I mean, I think there's an implied right of free speech according to, the laws that
Political,
have passed.
yeah, it's
And, and
political free speech specifically, I think.
and political free speech.
But
Um,
implied right to political free speech only, like not even an implied right to general free speech. It's very narrow, and even then, it's the vibe.
Go Australia. It will be interesting though, because social media, in addition to these this discussion that we're having around free speech at the moment, they have a lot of challenges potentially cropping up this year in terms of being sued for anti-competitive behavior in America. There's the news code. The ACCC has a number of investigations on the go. The privacy office of the information commissioner in Australia, they're having a go at Facebook for sharing information as well. So I think that this is one of a series of fires that we'll see for social media this year. And it also comes at a time when we're all using it so much more, because every now and again we just go into a snap lockdown.
So the other big news of the week was a Samsung Galaxy Unpacked event that sort of wasn't part of CES, but sort of was because it's in the same week. I'm joined by Lee Stark from Picker to talk through what Samsung had to unveil. Although, Lee, there weren't really many surprises given the quantity of leaks around these phones, were there?
Yeah, it does seem like Samsung does have a lot of leaks lately. Almost like maybe I don't know, the team guarding them kind of has set it up like a colander. Everything goes in and almost everything comes out. So we kind of knew what it was. And there are three phones. There's a Galaxy S21, an S21 Plus, and an S21 Ultra, and there's a pair of earphones. The earphones are something. Don't get me wrong. I'm keen to play with them, but the phones are going to be where all the action is. And two of them are really similar, save for the size, and then there's the special one.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been chatting to a few people about this. I actually had the opportunity ahead of the launch to have a bit of a play with some of them. And a lot of people kind of, I think, went in thinking, right, there's the special one, which is the S21 Ultra. I don't get Samsung's naming system. If you've got three phones, an S21 and S21 Plus, why isn't the biggest one the S21 Plus Ultra? But I digress. But a lot of people actually, I think, were a little bit more impressed with the S21. I think there's a bit of a movement towards smaller, powerful phones. Are you a fan of a small phone, Lee?
I am. I came away from the iPhone 12 launch, and I've reviewed all of them now, loving the iPhone 12 mini, wishing it had the power of the iPhone 12 Pro, but loving that small size because, hey, it's a phone that you can put in your pocket comfortably and doesn't feel like it's going to break your pants. That's a big deal. For Samsung, like the S21 and S21 Plus, they are largely the same phone with the exception of the size. They are pretty much identical. One is 6.1 inches, that's the S21, and the other one is 6.2 inches, rather, and the other one is 6.7 inches. I always keep having to remind myself, because 6.2-inch Galaxy S21 is very close to a 6.1-inch iPhone 12, and I think that's what they're trying to go for here, using more of that screen. It'll be a similar size, but it won't have the same bezels that the iPhone 12 has.
Yeah, look, Samsung definitely has a bit of an advantage given that it makes screens. In fact, it's no secret that it makes a lot of the screens that go into iPhones, and it's clearly saved sort of the better bits for itself. There is one difference with the S21 Plus that I think a lot of people are going to overlook, which is that it has ultra wideband support for IoT devices, but that's a bit kind of future leaning at this time. There's not a lot of applications right now that are going to take advantage of that.
I don't know how many people are going to use ultra wideband just yet. I genuinely think a lot of the attention on these models is going to be on the cameras because that's where a lot of the attention is in general. That's pretty much in the smartphone market as a whole. That's typically where we look. You know, how good's the camera? Is it going to be? Is it going to get me close enough to take pictures of animals when I'm really far away? Can I get a nice picture of my friends? That's largely it, and that's where. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a huge step up from the S21, or back from the S20 before it. And I wasn't a huge fan of the S20 cameras. They were okay, but they weren't mind blowing. This time, between the S21 two models, the main two models, you get 12 megapixel on ultra wide and standard wide, and you get 64 megapixel to let you get a bit closer on 3x optical zoom. That's kind of cool. I'm a little saddened that we're not seeing that 108 megapixel camera that they put in the Ultra in anything other than the Ultra, which it still is in.
Well, you got to save the nicest goodies for the biggest and most expensive phone, I guess. You're right on the camera front, though. I mean, I had the opportunity to have a bit of a play with the camera on the S21 Ultra, and look, again, a very, very short, very controlled kind of experience. And I think they've made some improvements there. So they still insist on this whole space zoom thing. And look, I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say if you punch anything from those kinds of sensors out to 100 times, you're going to end up with a garbage photo. And look, you still do, basically.
It's a lot of
They've got
pixels,
this
really.
yeah, they've got this thing they call Zoom Lock, which is meant to use AI to slightly straighten it up and help you out. I couldn't really see that in evidence in what I was able to test, although, to be fair, they did say there are pre-production models, the software can get better. They've got that kind of escape clause there. But I think, or from what I can observe, possibly that more mid-range, so that up to 30 and maybe a little bit more than that, might be a bit better than the S20 and the Note 20 were last year. The other big thing that the Ultra has, of course, speaking of the Note, is the S Pen.
It's easily the most exciting thing that Samsung's Note range has. It's last year in the Note 20, which wasn't a really spectacular phone when you think about it. It was kind of like Samsung's last hurrah, and it really wasn't quite that for the Note range. It's really interesting to see the Galaxy S range finally get that pen, which also kind of signs, I guess, the death warrant for the Galaxy Note range. It just doesn't seem like it'll be a thing anymore.
Well, I don't know that it does sign that death warrant, simply because out of the box, you're not going to be able to sign jack squat. Because the big catch here is that the S21 Ultra, despite being the absolute flagship of the range and the only one that will work with the S Pen, by the way, of the S21s, doesn't actually come with an S Pen. It doesn't even have a little hole in the bottom for the S Pen to slot into. You have to buy it as an extra accessory. So you got to be really keen on the S Pen and keen on the S21 Ultra for that to happen, and then not actually lose the darn thing because you don't have somewhere to store it.
Well, there is a special case for it. What I'm keen to find out is whether the optional extras. Do you remember a few years ago they launched a Stapler external S Pen? It was made by an actual pencil company to let people have the feel of an actual pencil when they use an S Pen. I want to know whether that works, whether the old S Pens do, because if they do, you might be able to pick yourself up an old phone for cheap and use that pen.
I don't believe, I don't, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the pricing is. I don't think the price of an S Pen standalone is all that much. I suspect the older Note, unless it's busted, might not work that well. Although I think I actually have one of those Stadler S Pens kicking around somewhere. So when I do get one in for review, I am definitely going to see how far back in S Pen history you can actually go and have it still work. Um, I guess the other thing with these phones, though, Lee, is they're still quite premium priced phones. And we saw a big push towards kind of much more affordable mid range phones. Even Samsung did this themselves with the generally excellent S20 FE.
Mm.
These are a little cheaper than the S20s were, comparatively speaking. But do you think that's enough in 2021?
Not really. And look, I've not played with the S21s like you have this week. I haven't had that chance. But I think people want a really good phone, and they're prepared to pay for it if they know it's going to be a great phone. The only reason Apple can secure people holding onto those phones for as long as they are, let's be frank, it's because they are very good devices. If Apple
Mm.
released something that was garbage, I'm sure some people would buy it, but I don't think en masse people would just stick with it. I don't think that would happen. Not when there's so much choice out in the market, and there is a lot of choice in this range. The Galaxy S21 Ultra may well be one of the best phones that comes out. We won't know until we really have a long play with it. But you look at what's coming out from Google, from Oppo, from Realme. Like, there are a lot of amazing 5G devices out there that you don't have to spend $2,000 for. And I'm a little concerned that moving the price just that little bit, look, it might be fantastic, but I don't know if it's enough. Like, the S21 Ultra starts at $1,849. It goes all the way to $2,149. It comes with 16 gig of RAM in that model. You don't need 16 gig of RAM in a phone. There's just absolutely no reason why you would ever need that. And yet, it's really hard to justify that sort of price, but it seems easier on an iPhone because you do typically get the best of the best.
So, speaking of justifying the price, of course, the other thing that should lead these things to being cheaper is Samsung following Apple's lead, because these are the first Samsung phones where you don't get headphones in the box and you
Yep.
don't get a charger either. And they're running the same kind of environmental line that Apple did on this. It's better for the environment. People already have chargers. I sort of buy that and I sort of don't. Where do you sit on that particular fence?
I don't have as big of an issue with a device not coming with a charger these days, because typically they we all have 100 of the things laying around. It's frustrating, it's annoying. You can get a better one. With earphones, I like them to come with some. I wasn't super impressed when Apple dropped them. It's annoying because you can actually get great earphones. It does, I guess, encourage you to buy better earphones because you have no earphones. I think what bothers me with Samsung doing it, one is because I'm fairly sure Samsung was adamant originally when Apple first did it that it was a dumb move. And
They absolutely slammed them on social media
yeah,
for it. You're absolutely right.
and the other thing is Samsung ages ago bought Harman, which owns AKG and
Hmm.
JBL, and for I think from the S8 onwards they came with AKG earphones, and it kind of drew a line in the sand. It was Samsung saying, "Hey, we're not just giving you junk; we're giving you something that's really good." It's a
Hmm.
shame to see that missing in action now, because no one really does good quality earphones with a pair of headphones, or with a phone rather, and to see Samsung just say, "Ha, we're not going to do it anymore." One, it's frustrating because it's a wasted opportunity for a brand that owns Harman Kardon and AKG, and two, I don't really know if anyone will ever really buy Samsung headphones, unless they're a diehard fan at this point.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Look, I think I've got more of a problem with the power adapter, and that's mostly from a safety perspective.
Mm.
People using much older power adapters, which might be on the way out, or people going, "Oh, well, there isn't one, but hey, I can pick up this $1 power adapter online from a Chinese factory. I'm sure that'll work and not electrocute me." It's a bad path to go down, and that concerns me because manufacturer built ones are generally produced to quite a high standard. The one you buy down the markets, not so much, and there are genuine risks there.
I hope that it encourages people to look at some of the alternative standards. Like, I'm a huge fan of gallium nitride ever since it launched last year, the GAN ones, because they're fast and they're small and they're heat efficient. But I think it's more likely that someone is going to go out and buy a nice pair of earphones than they're going to go out and buy a charge pack for it. And so I think you're right that people are going to end up in that a little bit dangerous situation where they end up with the worst kind of charge adapter that probably won't blow up, but might not might not be so well developed that it doesn't catch fire, and that is a concern.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, as usual, Lee. Now, you've been on the show a bunch of times before, but for people who are not familiar with your work, where can they find it and where can they find you on social media?
You can find me on social media at Lilo. My name's spelled like a girl, so Leighlo, and at picker.com.au. Thanks.
So, Jen, I got very, very excited this week about something from CES that you posted about, because, and very jealous, I should admit, because you managed to score yourself that rarest of delicacies, some caffeinated gummy bears. Have they been enough to keep you awake into the wee hours, and what's been exciting you? at this year's CES.
Well, I think that the caffeinated gummy bears have been exciting me so far. Thankfully, they were very helpful. They weren't the normal strength that I can normally procure from Amazon, but I was so grateful that somebody heard my plea, probably on this podcast, and then Uber went out and sent not just me but other people some as well. And so I'm glad that they're spreading the good word about weird caffeinated products. But CES this year, as you mentioned, was not like it usually was. However, I really appreciate that some companies tried to make it that way. So the first sort of presser that I saw, it ended with two dancers from apparently the Sylvia Bertoni School of Dance jumping around in silver, pretending to be inside washing machines, and two horses pretending to be on a live TV screen from TCL. So it made me feel right at home, like I was actually watching something happen in Vegas and just going, what the hell? Why are they spending money on this stuff?
This is the worst circular display I've ever seen.
Exactly. But it's so typical of a Las Vegas press conference. You queue up for 2 hours, you get in, you see some live horses doing a dance in front of a TV set that's not quite real yet, and then you line up for the next one. So the virtual lines were inside my house and kind of lined up all the press conferences one after the other. And of course, we saw big changes to televisions this year. I've been quite impressed with some of the people who've pivoted, as they say, to create some really wacky masks. There was a smart toilet, and what would your life be without a smart toilet analyzing your poo every day? There's been some interesting stuff, even though we've largely been at home in 2020.
So TVs are one of those key categories. And Adam, I know this is something you follow pretty closely. What's actually out there? I mean, is it just more 8K even though there's no 8K content?
Well, one of the big things that we've seen is LG is talking about mini LED, which they're calling QNED, which I think is a terrible name because it sounds too much like QLED from their opposition, Samsung. So QNED seems to be, it still has a backlight. So it's not like OLED, because one of the great things about OLED is that there's no backlight. Each little pixel lights up by itself. So when the pixels turn off to make a dark picture of the area of the screen, it really is perfectly black. You get great contrast, great picture. Anything with a backlight starts with a white light, and then when they want that area to be black, they have to try and block the light out. So of course you're going to struggle. Now, these mini LED televisions are not the true LED that people have talked about, where you would actually have LED individual pixels that go black to make a black screen. There is an LED backlight, but it's broken up into sections. Early LCD LED TVs would just have one backlight, and that was uniform, so it was very difficult to get light and dark on the screen at the same time. Then they started doing what they call full array dimming, and they broke it up into sections, so there might be 8 backlights or 12 backlights. QNED has got something like 30,000 backlights, so not one for every pixel, but fine enough,
But a
lot more. So you can have it's much easier to have a scene where you've got the bright full moon in one corner and the dark shadow with the vampire in it in the other corner, and be able to see the detail of both. Now, Jen, how does that stack up for you in terms of why would you bother going for that when you could go for OLED? What's QNED's other strengths?
I think one of the strengths is just probably the price, which we haven't seen. We haven't seen all the prices yet, but the price compared to an OLED screen. And they've said that they're bringing out OLED Evo, which is this next generation that's potentially brighter. It seems like a lot of the TV sets that we saw announced at CES are really focusing on the brightness of the screen, which is interesting. And I think that LG, from what they've described, have kind of a good, better, best strategy. So they're still promoting OLED as the best, and obviously they've got that advantage over a lot of the other manufacturers who've backed different products. But they also want to have something that is cheaper than OLED, is potentially more accessible for people. And it's interesting that we saw a lot of mini LEDs this year, and that, as you say, this QNED Flanders business, that it just seems to be like there's an extra array this year of acronyms that you have to learn all over again. And LG weren't the only company doing that either.
No, well, I mean, Samsung, if LG is going for The Simpsons, then Samsung's presumably got Keanu Reeves in their pocket, because their lighting thing this year is Neo QLED.
I'm okay with having
although
Keanu Reeves in my pocket, by the way.
look, we'll see what we can arrange.
Okay,
We'll see
thank
what
you.
we can sort out. But the other, and look, and again, they're targeting different price points with different products as they all do. But the other thing that did interest me, and Jen, I know we were actually at CES together, I think, at the same time when Samsung originally pitched this, is they've said they're finally going to bring their micro LED TVs, the one that they called the Wall, what, 3 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
They're finally going to bring those to Australia. People will actually be able to buy these micro LED TVs, and those are the ones, Adam, I think that you were talking about that were actual individual pixel lights for everything.
And these are absolutely enormous. And every time I think that people are going to pull back and they're not going to go for, 83-inch televisions, they decide to purchase them. So apparently you can't underestimate how many people want to see the biggest possible screen that's basically a window or a door at this point. In their homes. But the wall was interesting, and micro LED will be just as interesting. And they've also introduced something to make use of that giant screen where you can potentially watch 4 channels at once Elvis style with, one on the main channel and then previews of all of the others. And if I can get to my kid to at least, watch some of his cartoons on the smaller screens while I watch a proper channel on the bigger one, it will not have been a waste.
Well, it depends, I guess, on what you're choosing to watch and how much you want to scar your child. But over a 110-inch TV, yeah, you'd want to be able to do a little bit of picture-in-picture action, I guess. That we also saw some interesting stuff, and this kind of engaged me in terms of what they're calling rollable technology. So we've had rollable TVs, I think, at the last couple of CESs, and they're now going transparent, but we've also got a whole bunch of rollable phones. Now, Jen, I know you like a foldable phone. What's your take on rollables?
Unfortunately, I really want to see them. So we saw a couple of demos that at the end of the LG press conference, we saw their rollable phone, and apparently they only showed it briefly because they're quite confident that they'll be able to actually launch this in a real way in stores this year. However, as with the foldable phones, it's probably best to be skeptical for the first generation. And I see some things going wrong when things start moving. And obviously, with the foldable phone, which I love, there's a bit of a crease there. I guess you wouldn't have a crease for a foldable phone, but over time, like my yoga mat, if you fold it too often, does it just become curly? Is this the fax paper of smartphones? I have a lot of questions.
Now you got me worried if I leave it on my car dash, it's going to like melt to the side of it. But I love the idea of this, and I think regular listeners are aware. I like this kind of expanding phone into tablet, eventually into laptop kind of thing. TCL also had more conceptual stuff around that kind of idea as well, didn't they?
They did, and they often sort of premiere the way for screen technology, and then we see it in different places as well. But it was good to see that there was more than one company thinking about rollable phones, and potentially at some point Apple will have to think about some sort of folding rolling phone if all the others are doing it and they don't get to have a share. But it was interesting to see a bit of a preview of that, and TCL also came up with one of the more naff things. I thought that apparently is going to go on sale where you can, watch a movie inside your glasses. So potentially, if you don't want to buy a 110-inch TV for your lounge room, you can buy a set of glasses and you can just watch your movies in there. While they, I think, have to be connected physically to another device to actually feed the content in. So that's not going to look naff at all.
No.
Yeah, I like the concept of that because those are OLED screens. This is all very Google Glass, really, and TCL would seem to have the consumer nous for that. But as soon as they got to the point of they can connect to all sorts of things, and I thought, well, that's great via a DisplayPort cable. I thought, right, I think I'm out.
So you put on your mask before you leave the house, and then you put on your glasses so that you can watch the television, and then you connect up your DVD player. No, wait.
Strap it to your
something's
back.
gone wrong.
I was really surprised that they seem to be pushing transparent screens as a consumer product. Because I went to the OLED factory in South Korea a couple of years ago, and in the R&D department, they were showing us transparent OLED screens, and they seemed great, and they seemed to be designed for retail displays for in stores or maybe in restaurants and stuff like that, where it seems to make a lot of sense. But I'm not convinced that you'd necessarily want a transparent rolling TV rolling up out of the end of your bed in front of you. Jen, do you think that there's room in people's homes for a transparent OLED screen?
Look, there's probably not in my house. I just lose it amongst the piles of clothes. But you can't underestimate. Like, I remember when we thought that posing TVs as frames was a bad idea, and yet now Samsung not only has multiple versions of the frame, but LG has the gallery, and so that did work out. And they've got TVs that move to the side, and so you can watch your TikTok on them and stuff. Look, maybe it does seem a little bit a little bit like Kanye's bought you a hologram for your birthday kind of stuff. However, maybe there's a market for it. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how much disposable income we all have after, the riots and the lockdowns and the goodness knows what else is coming this year.
See, I think that you're missing well, to me, what seems like the obvious use case for this, as long as they can get that critical actual black working behind them, which is, I want to replace my windows with a transparent TV. Because that just seems like such an obvious use case. It's very Back to the Future too, for sure. But it just seems so obvious to say, right, no TV cabinet anymore. That window, it's a TV. When it doesn't need to be a TV, it's just a window. Why doesn't that work?
I think they tried this on the block in the most recent series, and so you looked out and it was like a fake lawn because otherwise it was somebody's house, and it just looked too much like a fake lawn. But I'm interested. I'm interested to see it in your house, Alex, and you can set the trend for the rest of us.
Sure, look, if anyone at LG is listening and wants to do the major renovation work, I'm all for it. You know how to get in touch. But I mean, speaking of weird things, Razer also came out with some really wild and wacky stuff, including their take on a face mask. And I'm surprised we didn't see more, although there was quite a bit, face masks and UV gear and kind of pandemic reactive tech. Jen, did anything grab your eye in that space?
Yeah, there are a couple of smart masks which I quite like the idea of. It's a weird one. Like I don't want to I didn't want to cover too much of the, we can detect COVID by, looking at the air around you kind of stuff, because a lot of that stuff I don't think is necessarily medically tested, and I'm certainly not a doctor. However, with the face mask, I thought there were a couple of interesting ones, including that one from Razer that is basically a respirator, and you can still see a person's face, which is good and bad. There's another one called Mask Phone that came up that I was quite interested in. I thought that was very innovative because they basically added headphones and a microphone so that you can still listen to your music without having to add too much stuff to your head. But I thought that was good and quite reactive to the times. And I'm interested to see a little bit more of that when people get a little bit more innovative with I don't want to say the new normal, so just 2021.
But this stuff's not all going away. No one could imagine that, this time next year we'll all be back at CES laughing about, remember coronavirus? Like, this kind of tech innovations will build for a couple of years. So we will start to see the version 2 and version 3 of these kind of things that are actually perhaps decent and really do solve a problem, even if they don't necessarily stand up to, we'll say, medical scrutiny.
Yeah, I thought there were a couple of other things too that really focused on being touchless. Like there was a touchless doorbell from Arlo that kind of sees the person there and then rings the bell for them and that sort of thing. There was some Kohler always comes out with some interesting bathroom products, and apart from their $20,000 bath, which I'm not actually investing in, they had some interesting stuff in terms of, touchless sinks and you don't have to, press the button when you flush the toilet and those sorts of things, which sometimes we've seen in public bathrooms, but we haven't necessarily seen at home. And so I think we're going to see more of this innovation as we sort of all have to adjust and those sorts of things. And so I think this is probably the first year that we'll see this sort of stuff, and the next year we'll see a lot more stuff in this regard. In terms of getting back to Las Vegas and getting back to CES, there was a lot of talk in some of the sessions that I watched around but when travel gets back to normal next year, it'll all be fine. And I thought, yeah, nah, buddy, you're going to have to run a lot of bleach over the US to get anybody else there. So I think that potentially we will be doing this all again remotely next year, and maybe we'll see a lot more weird masks.
Well, speaking of weird products, the other thing that having a digital CES has meant, certainly for me, and I suspect it's the same for you, Jen, is a lot more weird, wide, wonderful press releases for products you've never heard of, because everyone's scrambling to kind of get themselves seen. And at a traditional CES, you might do that because you might be on your way between one big vendor's booth and another, and then you see this amazing, robotic fish that cleans your teeth or something in the midpoint. You don't get that opportunity. Do you think this online only format hurts those little players?
I think it does. Like normally every year there's a few devices that kind of seem to pop out of nowhere and capture a lot of attention. I know one year I spent having a look around for the smart shoe because that was a thing that I'd sort of seen mentioned. And then, yeah, sometimes you'll be passing a booth and you'll see something that's amazing and kind of it pops out to you when you can actually see it demonstrated. And there's not the same ability that hasn't translated as well to just kind of, be walking down haphazardly and see something really interesting. So I also honestly think that this kind of format benefits the people who've been to CES before, who've been lucky enough to, because we kind of know the format for all of the days and normally what happens and, we're comparing it to something. Whereas I think if you came in fresh, you would have found this a lot more difficult this year. There's probably still the same number of press releases that arrive in my inbox for all of this sort of stuff. But as you say, there's not the same sort of discovery when, these smaller companies don't have the same sort of nous to get their message out there and now have to deal with this extra thing. Because another thing that used to happen at CES too was there's a giant sort of car park underneath one of the buildings, and that was called Eureka Park. And the idea was that, companies that are just starting up and just have some fresh tech that they want to demonstrate, it might be a bit conceptual, it might be proper strange, they could kind of fill that area. And if you had, a moment spare between queuing up for press conferences, you could go down and you could have a look around and see what you could find down there. There wasn't the same opportunity to do that online. And even though, I think Microsoft and CES and CTA did an amazing job of keeping the whole platform up and keeping it working, because goodness knows that doesn't happen with conference Wi-Fi, there still wasn't the same level of discovery this year.
So, did you discover anything that you thought, wait a minute, no, that's a bad product? Because usually at CES, there's a couple of those. There's a couple of either you're talking rubbish science or that's just a terrible idea straight up.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's always something. And so I don't know if I'm particularly sold on the wellness toilet, for example. Look, maybe it'll work out fantastically. And it's from a well-known toilet company from Japan called Toto. And they're saying it's conceptual, and the
Of course,
idea,
it's a Japanese toilet. Of course, it is.
and the
What does
idea
it
is
do?
that it would take your statistics from the skin that touches the seat, which is lovely, and also from the human waste that you add to it. And I just don't know that my toilet's ready for that sort of thing. Like in a year that I've been struggling to get toilet paper, I don't need any more of that. And there are a couple of other things. I don't know if I need a smart bed to actually tip me out of bed when my alarm clock goes off in the morning.
kids
Hasn't the
need that.
smart bed been at CES for like a decade now?
Oh, there's always some variation of smart beds. This time they also included aromatherapy. So they get you to sleep and then they kick you out of bed when it's time to wake up. And I need a dumb bed. I'm not ready for anything smart to sleep on.
I need two of them for
However,
my kids. Absolutely. I don't even need to see it. Just shut up and take my money.
I was really interested. There was a really cool observation station as well where you could that's available on Kickstarter and became available for pre-order, where you can kind of guide it around and take photos of different nebulae yourself using a smartphone. And so every now and again there's something really cool like that, and then there's a product that wants to disrupt something that shouldn't be disrupted.
Well, speaking of that, that actually leads into my least favorite thing, which was actually a press release. And I wanted to run this one past you for your reaction, Jen, because in one sense, I'm totally ill-equipped to judge it. I'm not going to name the company. I don't think they deserve the plaudits that way. But their lead line in their release was that they were a femtech company disrupting the pregnancy space. Is there a worse phrase than disrupting the pregnancy space if you're pitching to pregnant women?
I don't think that a lot of women are going to appreciate any disruption to the pregnancy space. I think that that's a rather personal issue and sounds very much like something that you don't want to happen, to be honest.
How were they disrupting said space?
I'll be honest and say I did
You
not
didn't
read
get
on
that
because I hit that and just went,
nope.
"You wait. Who approved that sentence?"
The
Because
big fat
wow.
note button.
So I can't tell you because that one went straight to the circular filing cabinet. Well, that static sound can only mean that it's time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Jen for making time for the show.
My pleasure.
So 3 quick-fire questions, Jen. If people want to find your work online or yourself on social media, where can they do that? And also, your vote, please, for the best children's cartoon character.
Right. Well, the important things first. Best children's cartoon character. I'm going to have to go with Clarence. And if you haven't seen it, you should. He's hilarious. You can find me on Twitter until I've been permanently suspended at Jen Dudley. And you can find lots of my stories all over the News Corp network, Daily Telly, Herald Sun, Courier Mail, all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Thanks also to Lee for joining us for the Samsung segment. And as always, you can catch up with us online at VerticalHoldAU on Twitter, at www.verticalhold.com.au on the web, or on the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And just a reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband back as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan. The promo code is Vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Aussie listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And as always, thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to tell your friends about us, leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, and help us spread the good word in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.